Hello and welcome to Nebraska State Fair. Backyard Farmer is here live. I'm your host, Kim Todd. We are so glad to be back at Nebraska State Fair. After a year off, we're going to have a great show for you, a lot of fun. We have a little bit of a reduced panel. Again, we're trying to be safe. We're still going to answer all those questions, though. You can't call in tonight. We have no phone panel. Also, we are kind of coming to the end of the season, so if you send us those emails, we might not get to them right away. But on that note, we're going to start right off with samples. And Rock, you have something that just might have found its way into your hand from the fairgrounds.
From the fairgrounds. Terry James went out and got this for me. It's tumble windmill grass. It's a grass that can be problematic. A lot of people don't like it. It's a warm season grass. So that means it's not green in the spring and the fall. And most people consider it a weed, but the interesting thing is that it's pretty tenacious. It really likes droughty conditions. And I've often wondered why we haven't spent some time doing something to kind of maybe let it be part of the landscape. And I know at one point in time, the Department of Transportation and the Department of Roads was talking about using it to stabilize banks around new construction, because that's what ends up there anyway. So I think this is where nature has kind of decided what they want to do. And we don't have any, short of Roundup, we don't have any selective control measure for it. So we can't really take it out of a lawn and that sort of thing. And you tend to see it in rural areas along the road because the seed blows in and right on that rough edge where it comes in. But that's tumble windmill grass. And these seed heads aren't fully extended, but when they do, they release, and then they've got seeds on them and they're dry, and then they blow across the yard, kind of like a tumbleweed, only this is a grass, and then they plant seed the whole time they're doing it. So pretty tenacious, pretty adaptable to adverse conditions, and yet we haven't exploited its genetics as a perennial species for Nebraska.
And we should, because especially since those seed heads look like sparklers.
Oh, I never thought about it.
They
like sparklers. Strange mind, Kim.
All right, Kate, this is your debut at State Fair. So what'd you bring us that's a creepy crawly?
So today I brought in some squash bugs. So they're a serious pest of things like zucchini, melon, squash, and pumpkins, and a lot of people are finding them this time of year. And this is one of those pests where it's really important to, practice good garden sanitation and do a fall cleanup, because they overwinter as adults. So if you have squash bugs now, be sure to clean up the garden to prevent them next year. And the key to controlling these guys is to scout early, look for egg masses on the underside of leaves, look for the young nymphs, because that's going to be the best time to treat is when they're young. The adults are pretty hard to kill off with insecticides. And if you do have a lot, and they get in pretty high numbers on the plants, so if you do find that you have a lot of squash bugs, you can treat with insecticides like permethrin or carbaryl, but it's really important to get the underside of the leaves as well.
All right, and once you have them, you pretty much have them.
Yes, once you have them, they're a really tough pest to get rid of.
All right, thanks, Kate. All right, Amy, what is it?
So my sample luckily was brought to me from our live Q&A earlier today. I have a potato that's a little corky. This is Corky Scab on potato, very common fungal disease that we're going to find in our tubers throughout Nebraska. So management for this one, there isn't a lot we can do for this Corky Scab at this point in time. You can still eat the tuber. Some people don't like it, but all you have to do is peel it, because it's all superficial. It's all right here on the skin. And next year, if we're having to continue problems with it, there are definitely some russet varieties out there that are more resistant or tolerant to Corky Scab. I would recommend that you try those varieties. Otherwise, if you come back in with the same variety, you may get scab again next year, or you may not. It has a lot to do with weather conditions. So you can still eat it. It just doesn't look very good for a baked potato.
It doesn't look good at all for any kind of potato, if you want to be truthful. All right, so we're going to deal right into pictures. Rock, your first question comes to us from Ayr, Nebraska, AYR. And it's a buffalo grass question. 23 years ago, planted it, purchased from Todd Valley Farms. Patch on both sides of the driveway, one side's fine. The patch that's dying did well until this year. Started dying. We have two other pictures on this. He has fertilized, he has sprayed with pre-emerge. All the green is weeds. And what do we think is going on here?
I actually, Kate could probably answer this. I think this is chinch bugs,
Right.
which is a multi-generational pest in buffalo grass, and there's actually a buffalo grass chinch bug. I don't think this is necessarily that particular one because that's relatively rare as we get to other parts of the state. But at the end of the day, this is a multi-generational. So even if you saw them early in the season, because their first one is June, July, their first generation is June, July, and then their second one is right about now. So the person should go out and look and just brush the turf back, and if it looks like the ground is moving, literally those are chinch bugs that are really just taking the turf down, and they tend to feed in the organic matter and the the crown right at the base of the soil. So you can put down an insecticide like permethrin and water it in so that it gets away from the top. And if Kate wants to add to that, but I'm pretty confident this is chinch bug injury.
Yeah, and the follow-up, actually, he confirmed that when he sent us a follow-up. So yes, looks like it could be anything.
So even a blind pig sometimes finds an acorn.
Perfect. Your next one also happens to be buffalo grass. This is a legacy buffalo grass lawn, 15 years old. Now it's got this weedy grass taking over with it. He wants to find something that can take out that weedy grass and not take out the buffalo grass.
So that's saltgrass, and all I can tell you it's saltgrass because there's really no selective herbicide for that. It's used on roadsides because it is very salt tolerant, especially when we tended to use sodium chloride rather than some of the beet byproducts and other things that we use now. So unfortunately, I can't make a recommendation other than to identify that as saltgrass.
All right, thank you, Rock. And your third one here is, this is an acreage west of Pawnee Lake. This grassy weed is trying to take over a whole acreage right now. What do we think this is?
That looks like crabgrass to me, which is pre-emergent in the fall, in the spring. Would do a pretty good job of that, and make sure you water it in or time it with a rain. There's a number of products out there that can do a pretty good job on crabgrass.
All right, thank you, Rock. All right, Kate, your first round of pictures. This one comes to us from Norfolk, and he has dots on the apples.
Yeah, so this looks pretty characteristic of San Jose scale. So you can if you look at the apples, there's kind of this halo of red around a white spot. And so that's actually a really tiny insect called a scale. Unfortunately, right now, there's not going to be much to do about it, but I would say come the winter, really check the branches for really heavily infested scales. If you do find really bad branches, you can prune them off or use a dormant oil on those.
And you can eat those apples, you just get a little protein.
Yeah, a little extra protein never hurt anyone.
All right, excellent. All right, your next one comes to us from Fort Calhoun. This is a hackberry, and probably pretty much every hackberry in the state looks like this. What is it? What do you do about it?
Yeah, so this is called hackberry nipple gall, and it's from another piercing sucking insect called a psyllid. So the psyllid will lay an egg on the leaf, it'll hatch, it'll start eating, and then the plant pretty much overreacts and forms this gall. They're not very pretty to look at, but it's not really going to harm the tree's health in the long run. So, and like Kim said, almost every hackberry is going to have it.
Exactly. All right, your final two pictures are, this comes to us from Scotts Bluff, and he has seen this over the years, but doesn't know what's really going on. These are galls on cottonwood.
Yeah, so I talked to Amy a little bit about this one, but we're pretty sure that it's crown gall.
Crown gall, which is actually caused by a bacterium. We'll see it in cottonwoods, but also in grapes. It's a natural occurring bacteria that will move in, and it causes these warty growths.
And?
Nothing you can do for it for treatment. You can prune it out if you really want to, but long term it shouldn't really hurt the tree. And with it being a cottonwood, I wouldn't get too extensive with pruning.
All right. And since you answered that insect question, be ready for a pathologist.
Oh, no.
Or not, Kate. All right. Amy, your first path question comes to us from Broken Bow. Mm-hmm. What causes these spots? They're 4 to 5 inches in diameter. It is bluegrass with an irrigation system.
So my first question is always going to be, do you have a female dog at home? It kind of looks like maybe potential urine from those dogs, especially with the heat. and the dogs going out and making their nice little visit out on that lawn. The other trick to do is, it's hard for me to tell from this angle, we could be looking at some smaller patches of brown patch in there. You really need to get down into that turf so we can look at that blade. With brown patch, we're gonna have irregular lesions that are tan in coloration and then have a really dark border around them. Very common in Kentucky bluegrass that it's very lush with lots of nitrogen is when we're gonna see brown patch coming in.
All right, and so nothing they can...
Nothing to do at this point in time.
Okay, all right, you have 3 pictures on this next one. This is North Platte. Seems like overnight these patches of brown appeared around the ponderosa pine, worse on the south side of the tree. Places where there are weeds of some sort, waters often because of the heat. She's wondering, is this a fungus?
I'm leaning toward not a fungus. If you would go back to the very first picture of the ponderosa pine, you can see how that ponderosa pine is really causing, on that south side, that browning. I'm wondering if this ponderosa pine is not inhibiting the sprinkler system to a certain extent and the way it's moving about, and it could be some drought stress associated with it. Would be one thing I would want to look at is that sprinkler package. But the other big thing is, once again, just like on the previous one, we need to get down into that turf. It could also be Cicada blight, which is very common with drought-like conditions. We will get that straw-like tip from the very tip of that blade working its way down. You'll see these black little fruiting structures in there. That's Cicada blight. Once you mow it off, it typically goes away once we get water going in there. But if it is Cicada blight, make sure you have a really sharp mower blade. If we have dull mower blades, we're more likely to have Cicada blight moving in because we're tearing that blade instead of doing a nice even cut. And rock really hates dull mowers.
Dull mowers are a no-no. As Amy eloquently said, they cause more injury above and beyond secondary injuries like pathogens. And I lean more towards Cicada on this one, Amy, just by the appearance, and it's on the southern side of that tree. But regardless, you can't do anything. Get some water to it and mow it with a sharp mower. Nicely done.
Excellent. All right, Amy, you have 2 more sets of
that's
pictures
fine.
here. 3 pictures on this one. This is a potted tomato showing injury, turned yellow, dry, spotty looking. This was in the pod, and then the garden tomatoes appear to be affected. She thought it was spider mites, 7, nothing happened. What do we think is going on here?
So this looks like multiple things going on. If we look at this picture, and on that leaf on the very bottom where we have more yellow and the brown, if we take a closer look at it, we can actually see concentric rings occurring down there. That's early blight that's moved in on these tomatoes. Early blight's going to continue moving up that tomato at this point in time. But you see some of that bronzing on the leaf, that's environmental stress. And being in a pot in August, usually I'm looking at drought stress to a certain extent. We can't keep enough water to those tomatoes when they're putting on that much fruit, and there's just not enough water base for them. So I would probably look at watering a little more frequently, morning and afternoon or early evening. Try to avoid getting that foliage wet because we do have some early blight on there, so we prevent it from moving on up the plant.
And so will she have that blight next year if she plants in the same place?
You would have the blight again because the spores are going to overwinter in that soil. So one of the biggest things to do is dump out that soil, bring in new soil next year. But also with your pots and with the cages, there's been a lot of recommendations that have shown that if you take like a Clorox wipe or a 10% alcohol blend and wipe off that pot in those cages, we will also destroy any of those spores that are overwintering on that pot or that cage. That can really reduce our inoculum source for the next year.
All right, thanks, Amy. Your next 3 pictures come to us from Alliance. This is Woods Roses, which is actually one of our native. What in the world do we think is going on, and are they likely to survive?
So when I looked at the very first picture, the leaves are a lot smaller. The canes are actually a little shorter too. It's making me lean toward either a virus infection of some sort or herbicide drift. If it's a viral condition, it will continue to look like that. For me right now, this is a wait and see. Let's see what it's going to look like next year. If we're continuing to see that smaller leaf growth pattern, then we're going to want to remove it from the landscape, knowing that it's most likely a virus. And we're either going to move it with our pruning tools, or it could be insect transmitted. But this is a wait and see and how it does next year.
All right, thanks, Amy. Well, earlier in the season, we had the pleasure of going to Gary Bell's home and looking at his fabulous wildflower and prairie planting. For our first segment tonight, we've returned to Gary's house to talk about how seeds are started, and he's going to show us that in our greenhouses on campus.
So we've seen all the prairie plants that I grew from seed, and now we're going to look at how you grow those from seed. I start mine in a 3-inch pot. My seed planting tool is the center of a paper plate cut out into a circle and folded on one side. Fill the pot with potting mix, and then you just tap the side of the paper plate and sprinkle them in. They need a little bit of soil on top usually. Firm it down, water it, and you're ready to go. If you have to put it in the refrigerator for cold treatment, then put a plastic bag over it, and write on the outside of the plastic bag how long it has to be in the refrigerator. There's a lot of seeds you can get from different companies. They're from $3 to $5 a package, so that allows you a little experimenting. So we put the seeds under the light or in the refrigerator, then take them out and put them under the light, and now it's time to transplant them. So I dump the seedlings out into my cupped hand, and then I set them down on the paper plate, and I tease them apart with forks or these tools that I have here. Then we tease one plant out, we make a hole, we use a stream of water to get the roots down into the hole, maybe add a little extra soil, tamp it down, give it another spray, let it sit out of the light for 24 hours, and then it's time to go under the lights. They'll grow for about a week, and then you'll be able to take them outside. I've designed a minimalistic light setup here for 4 nursery trays. This is all stuff you could get off the shelf here locally. I've got 2 plastic folding sawhorses, a 4-foot by 2-foot sheet of melamine, some rigid bead styrofoam that I cut up with a bread knife and glued down with hot glue, and 2 shop lights from the big box store. And you need the seeds or seedlings as close to the light as you can get. You're only going to have them under there for a while, and then they'll be ready to move. To cold treat your seeds, you can either put them in a little pot inside of a plastic bag, you can put them in a coffee filter folded up inside of a plastic bag, or you can put them in a little sample of potting soil mixed in with seeds in a plastic bag. Mark the date and how long they need to stay in there and take them out, and then plant them in a pot the way you regularly would.
And what you really need to do is watch that first segment so you can see how those teeny weeny little seedlings turned into this absolutely beautiful prairie garden at Gary's house. All right, Rock, next set of questions. There are 2 on this. What is this grass? This is from Alliance, very drought tolerant. He did describe the ligules and the hairs on the blades.
So we talked about this one earlier. This is saltgrass again. So apparently we're seeing this expressed itself in a couple of locations, and there's no way to remove it, but it's very salt tolerant. And there actually are commercial cultivars of saltgrass available that they use on roadsides. And then if you have really salty soils or sodium affected soils, then saltgrass is actually recommended. It's a little more shade tolerant than buffalo grass, not as vigorous in growth, but you can buy, and this could have been brought in by a bird or something along those lines, which is quite possible, but this is saltgrass.
All right, your next 3 pictures come to us from West Point. This viewer is saying this showed up at a small pond next to the river. He's worried that it's our invasive Phragmites.
This is reed canary grass. It's not invasive. It's relatively easy to control if you just cut it back and let the other plants grow up around it, but that's reed canary grass. So it's got the hollow stem, and some people do mistake it for Phragmites, but that head was going to result in being a canary grass seed head.
All right, and your last two pictures here, this comes to us from a Lincoln viewer. She had fiber optic cable or new cable put in, and the soil that was put back, she has been working with, composting, et cetera, trying to get those clods of what looks like asphalt to break down. The garden glove is on there for a sense of scale.
So when they trench, they often bring up the worst soil from down below and put it on the surface, and then the homeowner or the farmer, for that matter, is stuck with these really horrible clods and other things. And I think you said she started to add some organic matter. This is going to be, you're going to have to continually add that cultivated in with a rototiller, something along those lines. And it's going to take a while because, number one, that soil that was down below it has a really unstable pH, so nutrient and everything is going to be a problem. Plus, it's just really compacted, and I think you could make bricks out of that, actually. It looks like something you could make bricks out of. I don't mean to make a joke about it, because they're already doing what we would suggest they do and getting the organic matter in there, but just continue to put on the compost and continue to incorporate, because until you get a good, stable soil, that the microbial activity is good, it's going to be nasty. So soil health is germane in this particular example.
All right, thank you, Rock. All right, Kate, your first one is a simple question. What is this?
So this is a bagworm. So bagworms are serious tree pests, especially of evergreens. This one seems to have made its way off of the tree onto the side of a house, which happens sometimes. But it looks like the activity of the caterpillars has ended. So if you do find these bags either on the side of your house or on a tree, this time of year it's really important to just pull them off and dispose of them, crush them, put them in soapy water to prevent caterpillars from hatching next year.
All right, your next one comes to us from Hastings, and this person wonders, is this bagworm on his arborvitae?
Yes. So this, once again, is bagworm, and like I said, activity has ended, so just really taking the time and inspecting the tree and pulling off as many bags as possible.
All right, your next two pictures are just basically, what are these? Thought they would share.
Yeah.
Back porch wall, and this comes to us south of Hershey.
Yeah, so these are some lovely moths. This first one is called a wavy-lined emerald moth. And then the second one is another type. They're closely related, and they're just kind of generally called geometer moths, which means earth measuring, and that's because their caterpillars are commonly called inchworms, just kind of in the way they walk. But yeah, just beautiful moths.
Geometer, I've never heard that. That's very cool. All right, thank you, Kate. All right, Amy, your first one is an Omaha viewer, limbs turning brown on a fir. And two pictures on this one. What do we think is going on here?
So looking at this one, on this one you can see there's a little bit of a growth just above that brown needle or stem. Most likely on this fir we're looking at some type of canker of injury on that branch. Best thing to do would be to remove it. It may change the shape of that fir, but I would remove it to prevent the spread of that canker to other portions of the tree.
All right, two pictures on this next one, and this one comes to us from Elkhorn. They're wondering, is this disease or is this winter kill on this particular tree?
I would lean toward winter kill just by the way the brown looks. You could go in and you can prune off that entire top, but it's really going to change the shape of your tree. It might be a great time to start considering new options in that space.
All right, and your last two are on a Black Hill spruce. This is in Lincoln. Second picture, I think, shows us the baseball.
So both of these pictures are beautiful for these Black Hill spruce. As you can see on that baseball, this is Cytospora Canker at its finest. The picture before, we kind of saw that white resin growth. Very common canker. Once again, we'll want to go in and prune those branches if possible, if it doesn't take away from the aesthetic of the tree.
All right, you have a handful more pictures.
Okay.
This one is a clematis that is 20 years old, receives direct sun. The flowers have started to do this bizarre thing, the purple one, and then you can see that strange green one over there on the right. What in the world?
This one actually had me a little stumped. There are a few viruses that will impact clematis. I didn't know if this was a grafted clematis. If it was grafted, maybe it's the original that's coming through. It's a little weird. I would give it a little bit of fertilizer. The leaves are looking a little pale in my opinion. Let's just wait and see what happens next year.
All right, your next one is a new redbud here in Grand Island. Has leaf spots. What is this and does it need to be treated?
So this actually looks like drought stress to me with the way those spots are going. We've been underneath a lot of extreme drought, even in the Grand Island area. Grand Island's been lucky to get some rains here lately, but it's just drought associated with the way that leaf is turning brown. Make sure you water that tree really well this fall as we're going into the winter months, and you need to water it more than what your lawn sprinkler gives it, because that isn't enough water for your redbud. So you want to put that hose on a trickle within the drip canopy of that tree, so not at the base where that drip line is at, and let it run really slow just to get a nice deep saturation of that tree.
All right, and these last two that were on our screen were also redbuds. They were from Sioux City. So
Sioux City is definitely drought. Very, very dry up in Sioux City. So exact same thing. We got to get them some water.
All right. So your final picture is, she just found this interesting fungus among us in the cucumbers, and this is near Central City. What is this?
This is a stinkhorn, one of the favorites of mine. They do stink. They're attracted by flies. The flies spread their spores. They feed on dead organic matter. And if you don't like them, you pull them out and throw them away. They only last for about 2 days.
All right, excellent, thank you. Well, for our very last segment in the garden, or our Garden Minute, Terry is going to give us a little bit of a recap on just how our season in the Backyard Farmer went this year.
This week in the Backyard Farmer Garden, we're wrapping up our season. We're continually harvesting a lot of the produce that we have left in our garden. Those fall vegetables that we planted are really coming in, and they're going to start producing here soon also. We're going to continue collecting produce from the community on Tuesday nights through September. So if you live in the Lincoln area and you have extra produce, please drop that by the Backyard Farmer Garden. We are looking at what we did good, what we did bad, but we have had one question as to how do we choose some of the annual flowers that we plant in our garden. Because of being an All-America selection, we get lots of different colors that we don't get to choose. So the ones that we actually do get to choose are very neutral colors that are really good blenders. So when you start planting your 2022 garden, think about some of those neutral color flowers that you can really blend the colors into. So stop by the Backyard Farmer Garden and check it out.
But right now it is time for the plants of the week. And Sarah, we've had a little switcho-chango in the chairs, so now we have horticulture and you get the plants of the week.
Yeah. So the first plant we wanted to talk about here is an ornamental millet. This happens to be a cultivar called Copper King. And at University of Nebraska, they've done quite a bit of breeding work on some of these ornamental millets. They actually came out of the breeding work that was done for regular production millet, and they found some that had some really pretty purple leaves and purple seed heads on them. And so they went into the ornamental trade. So these are great plants for birds. You know, there's lots of seeds in this millet head, and birds love to eat the seeds when they're ripe. So you can get these millets in smaller dwarf sizes that get to be about 2.5 or so feet tall. But then there are some others that are taller. So they can work well in a container garden, or they can work well in a flower bed. And then you just let them stand over the winter so the birds can come and eat all of the seeds off of these millet heads. And the foliage on this particular plant is not particularly dark red, but there are some others that do have a much redder foliage than this that make a nice accent in the garden as well. So this is ornamental millet. We also wanted to talk a little bit about some of the flowers that are in our flower arrangements here at the front of the stage. The seed head, they're the flowers that have the tiny little yellow flowers in clusters. Those are goldenrod. And I know a lot of you are familiar with goldenrod because we have it growing along the roadsides in Nebraska all the time in the fall. You know, and some people are really hesitant on goldenrods. You know, they say, oh, I've got allergies in the fall. I don't want to have goldenrod in my garden because it's going to cause me to have allergies. But most of the time, it's not goldenrod that's causing allergies, it's ragweed. Goldenrod actually has a really heavy, sticky type of pollen that needs to be transferred from flower to flower by insects. So I wouldn't let allergy problems get you to stop not planting goldenrod. There are so many different cultivars. They can be really short, like baby gold or baby coal, which are really small and compact, up to some of the really big types that have the big open fan heads. I think a few weeks ago we had some goldenrod on the show, a Wichita Mountain goldenrod. And the seed heads or the flower heads on that look a lot more like a Liatra seed head. They're not as open as these that we have in the flower arrangements in front of us. They're a much more columnar contained seed head or flower head, I should say, and they're very, very pretty in the fall. So goldenrod is a great Nebraska flower in many different forms to try to grow in your perennial garden.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Rock, your first question, she knows what it is. This is Wahoo. She has an entire landscape filled with Asiatic dayflower. How does she get rid of it?
Oh my. So you're going to have to be really persistent, and you spray them and you cut them back. You spray them and you cut them back. You spray them and you cut them back. So this is going to be a multi-year obsession, and I don't think I've ever seen this dense a stand of Asiatic lilies, and they're very problematic in that they do move into other parts of the yard and garden. So lots of spraying, and I don't see anything salvageable in that. Right. So I would hit them with glyphosate a lot, or Roundup, and hit them a lot. If they want to get rid of them, that's what they're going to have to do. They can try digging them, but they leave a little portion of it back, and it's going to be back as quick as it was. So yeah, you're going to have to get some glyphosate on that.
All right, your next picture, she's seen some publications about poison hemlock with purple on the stems. This plant has purple in the foliage. She's concerned that this is poison hemlock.
Now this is toothed, Toothed, spurge. It's a euphorbia. Some people call it poinsettia spurge, which interestingly enough, poinsettias are a member of a euphorbia family, but this is not a poinsettia like you would physically want. And getting rid of it, it can be pulled up. It's an annual. It could be sprayed. There's any number of ways, but it's not. Thank God, it's not poison hemlock.
All right. Your next one is a thistle. And this comes to us from Bennett. She wants to know what kind of thistle we think this one is.
This is tall thistle, and I don't mean tall like because it's taller than me, because that's not really a metric. But at the end of the day, this is what we call tall thistle. It's in the same family as some of our invasive species, but this is a native and non-invasive.
All right, and your last two pictures are also thistles. This one has been described as being cabbage thistle. And the question is how in the world to get rid of it, because it seems to creep through rhizomes.
Yeah, so I think this is cabbage thistle. I think the viewer, person sending in the email identified it as that. And thank God it's not one of our invasive ones, but it will be problematic, and you're going to have to, if you cut them off at the base, when they're really young, or spray them when they're young, they're relatively easy to control. But when you look at those pictures, there's a lot of leaf area on there, and you're probably not going to be able to get as much herbicide as you want. But if you cut them off at the base and then spray that cut base, just like you would a woody tree, with a glyphosate or a glyphosate, a broadleaf herbicide combination, like the poison ivy killer, spray that cut stem with it. Or spray it back and let it die back down, because they have an extensive rhizomatous root system on them, and they will just continue to grow. So you need to get it in there, get it moved into the rhizomes.
All right, thank you, Rock.
You bet.
All right, Kate, this comes to us from Callaway. It doesn't fly, it drops when you touch it, it's attached to light and water, it crunches when you step on it, and it doesn't bite. What is that?
Yes, so this is a strawberry root weevil. So the immature larvae of these feed on the roots of strawberries, brambles, and evergreens. So if you have any of those outside your house, you might be finding the adults making their way inside, especially during periods of hot weather, which is what we've been having. So they're not really going to cause any damage inside. Like you said, they don't bite. So the best thing you can do is just take a look around the outside, try to figure out where they're coming in from, make sure screens are still intact. If you need to caulk up certain areas, that's the best thing.
All right, your next one comes to us from Douglas County. Saw it in a planter. What is it?
So this is a leafy spurge hawk moth, or they're also called hummingbird moths because they have those like big robust bodies and they're often mistaken for hummingbirds.
All right, and your next one is coming to us from Columbus. What's that one?
So this is another one of those hawk moths. This one's called an Achaemon hawk moth. And the cool thing about this one is you can't really see it in the picture, but their hind wings, which are covered up right now, are this really beautiful hot pink color.
Hot pink, love it. All right, your last two pictures come to us from Dar, and dead cicadas on the deck, and they're tucked into the deck, and he's wondering what in the world is going on. He did see what he described as a black hornet carrying them down there. What's the deal?
So this kind of tickles me a little bit. So it's likely that you have a cicada killer nest underneath there somewhere. And what they do is they catch cicadas, paralyze them, and they try to bring it back to their nest to feed their young. But this one obviously picked the wrong spot because the cicadas don't quite fit. So luckily, they're not going to be contributing to the gene pool. Yeah.
I love it. All right, thank you, Kate. Okay, Sarah, your first one is interesting. It is her Ageratum, and she's got leaves growing on the leaves. What's that all about?
Yeah, and I have to admit, I don't know what this is. I've never seen this on leaves before, Ageratum or any other kind of perennial. So I'm not sure if this is some unusual type of a gall or if this is the symptoms of a virus. But since Ageratum is an annual plant, I would just get rid of that plant in the fall, and you probably won't see it again next year.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Your next two pictures come to us from Nebraska City. He wonders what this is. He thought he planted a dahlia, and is it a dahlia?
It is a dahlia, yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So he was right. It's just not exactly what he thought he planted.
Some dahlias can be very short, some can be quite tall. But this is a dahlia.
All right. Then we have one that came to us from a home near Garrettson, South Dakota. It's a double daylily. She says the bed's been in for decades. It's the first time they've noticed this. Any thoughts on how that could have happened?
Yeah, this is a little bit of a head scratcher too, so I don't know exactly what's going on here. Potentially some kind of fasciation that maybe caused a stem to double like that, and so you're getting multiple buds coming out at the top of the stem. Mm-hmm. Or I'm not even sure if a virus could cause this. So this is another odd one. It would be interesting to know if just one flower on this plant had these symptoms or if the whole plant was doing this. And then the next thing that I would be interested in is, does it do it again next year?
Exactly.
I don't know that this is really any harm for the rest of the daylilies in your bed. So if it were mine, I would probably just let it go and see what it does next year.
All right, thank you, Sarah. You have three pictures on this next one. This is from Prague, Nebraska. Tree leaves curling browning. It's a 40-year-old sugar maple. Has been watering due to drought, maybe not enough. Doesn't think it's had too much water. What do you think?
Yeah, it's pretty hard to overwater given the temperatures that we've had in the last 4 to 6 weeks. Unless they're watering really frequently. If they're watering every other day or they're watering 4 or 5 times a week and they're only putting on small amounts of water, they could be getting a completely saturated layer of soil there that's not allowing the oxygen to penetrate. But if this is not an area where you have an automatic irrigation system, I would say most likely this tree is underwatered. You really need to step up the watering on this tree. And every time you water, you want to soak about 10 to 12 inches deep. And when temperatures are in the 90s, you want to do that about once a week. So all the way from the trunk out to the edge of the widest leaf, or the edge of the widest branch. So you've got a large area underneath the crown that you need to be watering. So without a whole lot more information on what they've done for irrigation, I'm going to lean toward not enough.
All right, thanks, Sarah. You have two pictures on this next one. It's a burning bush. Sub-zero temperatures took its toll. Should she go ahead and take out that dead and let it come back from the base?
Those stems that are bare, if they had enough bark left alive, they would have leafed out already again this year. So you need to cut the dead back. And I would also cut back the stems where you're only getting these little tiny bits of little tiny leaves. I think most likely those leaves or those branches are going to be completely dead in the springtime. So you're going to have to cut this bush way back. Now, if you're willing to let it grow for the next 4 or 5 years to grow back into a nice sized shrub, you can certainly do that. But again, if you decide there's not enough left alive to work with, then you might need to just dig it out and start over.
All right, and your final two pictures, Sarah, are Lincoln. This is an eastern white pine planted on a berm. This spring, northeast corner of the property, hot west sun. Is this a goner?
Yeah, without a lot more information about irrigation, I'm going to say this is not enough water. This looks like a completely desiccated white pine.
All right, excellent. Well, you know, all good gardeners know that what is so important in your gardening is soil and soil health. So here is Becky Young to talk about how to take a soil sample.
So whether you're looking to establish a new garden, modify existing landscape, or just rectify a problem that you have in your garden or lawn or vegetated areas, a great way to solve that is by collecting a soil sample and sending it off for a chemical analysis. So the tools you would want to have if you're going to be sampling in your landscape are a bucket, a hand trowel or shovel, or maybe a soil knife. If you're going to be sampling deeper, you might want a big shovel or a spade, some sealable plastic bags, a marker, and maybe some masking tape. Before you start sampling though, you would want to create a schematic of the area you plan to analyze. I recommend this because we often have front lawns, back lawns that are sometimes managed differently, maybe some wooded or shrubby areas, and then a vegetable garden. So how you manage the landscape and the types of plants you want to grow will determine how you sample on your landscape. So the key for sampling is section off and sample unique areas separately. Then also plan to take about 6 to 8 smaller samples for that entire area. You're going to create a composite sample for that one area. Then take into consideration what the soil physical properties are of that area. Is one part of your garden have a higher clay content than another? Because if so, you'd want to sample those differently. If you're establishing a new garden, if you want to plant half in blueberries and say half in root vegetables, those require different chemical or fertility recommendations and characteristics, so you'd want to sample those separately as well. So when you're sampling, the sample depth is going to vary based on what you plan to grow in that area and how you manage it. We generally recommend about 4 inches for a lawn, sampling down to about 4 to 6 or 8 inches for a garden, and down to about 12 inches for establishing new trees or sampling in wooded areas. So you want to collect 6 to 8 smaller samples, about a handful, from different spots within an area. You'll place them in a bucket, mix them together, and that is your composite sample for that one area. Next, you want to label your bag that you're going to put your sample in. Include your name, the location that your sample is from, and the depth to which you sampled. Using a quart or maybe a gallon-sized sealable plastic bag, put in 2 to 3 cups of your mixed sample, seal it, and send it off to a reputable soil testing lab. So after you send your soil off to the testing lab and you get your data back, there are some things to look for on your soil test report. They can be a little daunting. Each row represents your different samples. The first thing you want to look for on your test report is for the soil pH. This affects how well your plants will grow in your soil because it tells you how acidic or basic your soil is. It will also affect your microorganisms in the soil, the decomposition rate, and some nutrient availability in your soil. Some other things to look for on a soil test report are the cation exchange capacity. This gives you an idea of the relative fertility of your soil. The higher this number is, the better. And then also look at some of the nutrient concentrations that take up most of your data tables. These will often be in parts per million and include concentrations of your essential plant nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, potassium, and so on. Sampling and testing your soil is the only good way to really determine if you have any nutrient deficiencies in your soil and how to properly apply soil amendments.
So as Becky said, you want to make sure you take that soil from a number of different locations in your landscape. Good idea. All right, Rock, 3 pictures. This is Gretna. Why is the turf dying even though it is being watered? She's done 6-step fertilization. Outside has died for some things, not able to determine if this is fungus, soil, what exactly is going on here?
So that very first one, it looked like it was coming in from an adjacent yard. So when I looked at the first one, I kind of thought, well, this certainly looks like something was applied to the yard adjacent, and who knows what that might be. I'm not saying that fences make good neighbors, but maybe not in this case. But I'm not saying that's what it is. And then you look in these other places, the ground looks, I mean, that looks a lot like Cicada, which is caused by droughty turf, but we rarely see that. That's a pretty uniform appearance to that burn, right? So I'm not really sure what this is. It'd be great to see a closer sample of the leaves to kind of get our arms wrapped around what this might be, because there could be multiple things going along here. They could be some Cicada or maybe some brown patch going on closer, or I'm going to throw my hands up and say I can't really come up with a great determination based on this picture by itself.
All right, your last 2 here are, this viewer cut down a locust, and now your second picture is, of course, what that locust is doing for revenge, which is coming up all over the landscape. How do they kill the suckers?
Well, in the first step, it looked like they were really playing intense tic-tac-toe, but on this one here, you know, that locust has got a huge root system on it, and they're going to have to hit it a lot, and it's going to continue to sprout, you know, and I would not suggest, you know, using Tordon or anything like that. A lot of people reach for Tordon on trees, and the soil residual on it is way too high. But, you know, any of the poison ivy type killers or brush killers would do a really good job on those. And be warned, it's going to probably pop a couple of times because that's a pretty big trunk on that locust. So just be persistent, and you will eventually get rid of all of it. And if you don't be persistent, then you're going to have another locust where you wanted to get rid of it.
All right, thank you, Rock. All right, Kate. Your first one is a Lincoln viewer here. Several cherry tomatoes and regular tomatoes have small BB-like holes in them. What is this?
So this looks like it could be done by the tomato fruitworm, which is a type of caterpillar that eats the fruit of the tomatoes. So if you see caterpillars on your plant, you can simply pick them off, you know, dispose of any infested fruits, and then you can use an insecticide like BT or spinosad as well.
All right, your next 2 pictures are Grand Island. What's eating into these tomatoes?
I would say probably the same thing. It does look like tomato fruitworm to me. You can kind of see those entrance holes on the outside of the tomatoes. That's kind of, you know, just characteristic of the fruitworm.
Yeah, it's just gross. All right, so your next 2 are a Weigela shrub, 5 or 6 years old this spring. Saw some dead tips, which is typical. Now seeing these little white things all over it. What is that?
Yeah, so my first thought was scale, but it honestly doesn't really look like scale to me. It's a little too uniform along the twigs. But what you can do to check just to make sure is, you know, go against the twig, scratch it with your fingernail. If it comes off easily, it could be a scale, but it just might be part of the plant.
All right, thank you. Sarah, your first one is purchased what was labeled as a cantaloupe. And they're wondering on this one, did somebody switch the label?
No, I think this still could be a cantaloupe. There are some specialty types of cantaloupes that don't have the traditional netted skin that we're familiar with. So I would go ahead and let this ripen and harvest it and try it, because I think you still have a cantaloupe.
All right, thanks, Sarah. 2 pictures on this next one. This is from Beatrice. 4 hollies. They're on the south side of the building, dead areas caused by winter issue. He wants to know, when is the best time to prune them, and should they prune the damaged areas now?
No, don't prune them now. I would wait until plants have gone dormant and they're no longer growing. So that could be mid to late November. And then I would go in and I'd prune out all the dead, and you can do some shaping if you want to at that time too. If you prune them now, the problem is you could institute the plants or cause the plants to start putting on new growth, which then wouldn't harden properly and could be killed when we have our first cold weather. So it's better to wait until they're dormant and they're not growing anymore.
All right, and south side in rock against a wall is probably not the best spot for those.
No, this wasn't an ideal spot for these.
All right, your next one, Sarah, this is identifying a weed. This is in Bellevue. What is this? They thought they planted a sunflower.
Yeah, definitely not a sunflower. If you can look really closely at the fruits in this picture, and they're kind of hard to see because they're small, it could be a ground cherry or it could be a tomatillo. They're both in the same family, so something along that line. Ground cherry is, you have to be careful with plants in this family because some are poisonous and some are not. Tomatillo is not, obviously, we eat that one, and some people also eat ground cherry, but I would be careful with plants in this family.
Well, and it could also maybe be Chinese lantern.
Could be, which is more of an ornamental type, which is not edible.
Right.
So you got to be a little careful.
Don't consume. All right, Sarah, your next two pictures are, what is this? 5 feet tall, small little buds, but it doesn't seem to really want to put on those flowers.
I think this is American burnweed, or sometimes called pilewort or fireweed. It's a weed in the aster family, so you would get rid of it.
All right, then we have one that is planted this with potted flowers in the spring. She doesn't know what it is, but she's told she can bring it inside. What is it, and where's the best place to move it in?
Right, it's called purple heart, and it's not winter hardy, so you can't leave it outdoors. It won't survive. I would put it in a fairly bright window, like maybe an east window or someplace like that. A south window with really direct sun might be too hot, but an east window would be good.
All right, so as long as we're on bringing it in, Kate, should she do something about insects before she brings it in?
Yeah, I would, wash off the leaves really well because you could have things like spider mites and other little tiny things that you can't quite see very well.
All right. Now, Sarah, your final picture is that one they just put on the screen for us, which is receive this plant at a senior center. They want to know what it is. They want to know what those stringy things are hanging down at the bottom. They want to know if they can cut them off. They want to know whether they can prune it, and they want to know when they should repot it, and will they kill it if they try.
Okay, so it's called split-leaf philodendron, but it's not actually a true philodendron. It's in the genus Monstera, so it's called Monstera deliciosa, but it's a very common houseplant. The little stringy things are aerial roots. I would leave them attached if possible. When you repot them, just put them into the soil in the pot. When to repot it? You could do that now. They're not picky since it's a house plant. You can pretty much repot them any time of year. Just make sure you break up the roots because you're going to have lots of circling roots. Pruning it back, yeah, you can prune it back too. Yeah, they prune pretty easily.
And it looks like they get monstrously big.
They get very large. This plant is very large.
All right. Mm-hmm. So we are finished with picture questions, but we still have some time. And since you're in the hot seat next to me, this is one you didn't anticipate.
Okay.
So it is time to control Creeping Charlie. What about the violets and the dandelions, and what do we use?
So all of the perennial broadleaf weeds are best controlled in the fall. So all three of those, and they have, there's three-way products and there's all kinds of products that are for broadleaf weed control. But because you have Creeping Charlie and ivy in there, you definitely want one that's got triclopyr in it. And there's a number of them on the market. T-Zone is one that you can get mail order, and then some of the stores carry it. But it's triclopyr and MCPP, which is not relevant to this conversation, but it is one that would be death to all three of those species and work really, really well. But look for the herbicide, active ingredient triclopyr when you're going after difficult to control perennial weeds like Creeping Charlie or wild violet.
And watch the temperature.
And watch the temperature. I mean, today, we didn't, but last week you wouldn't have been able to spray in central and eastern Nebraska because we had temperatures in excess of 95 and 100 degrees with heat indexes even hotter than that. So avoid really hot conditions because the off-target drift and volatilization is going to be high even with the products that are designed not to move. Well, avoid high temperatures.
And the nice thing about those high temperatures, it was hot enough that most human beings would probably not have wanted to be out there spraying anyway.
Anyway, it's probably not a good idea because then you're passing out because you're spraying, right? Yeah, good idea.